Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm Dani, and today Great.com talks with Charlotte Dahl, the Conservation and Policy Campaigner of Wilderness Committee. If you haven't heard of it, they are a Canadian organization that works to protect biological diversity through strategic research, community mobilizing, and grassroots public education. Remember, if you're new here to this podcast, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. Hi, Charlotte, and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm really eager to learn more about what you're fighting for in Canada right now. And to get us started, could you share some of the origin story of the Wilderness Committee?
Yeah, definitely. To do that, I'd have to take you back to 1980s in a Dairy Queen, um, where one of he's semi-retired now, but a man named Joe Foy joined as the first volunteer to the Wilderness Committee, started by Paul George. It was sort of founded out of this need to protect endangered species in Canada, such as the spotted owl, and also to protect their old growth forest home. So in BC, we have some of the largest and oldest trees on the planet. And these are also obviously um, top of the list to logging corporations who want to get their hands on the last bit of old growth forest. So we sort of started this organization based on the need to halt the logging of the last remaining old trees. So that led us to the War in the Woods and Clayoquot Sound, where it's kind of this epic battle of, people trying to protect the forest from logging companies moving in, and that was somewhat successful. They got a large portion of area sort of protected off limits from logging. And then it kind of just continued on since there. And ever since we were founded, we were really grassroots in the sense of working with communities as much as we can. Having actual feet on the ground is so important for us. And we've kind of remained that way. And I feel really lucky to be working for the Wilderness Committee. I really think that we're one of the best. I'm proud to say it. But yeah.
Oh, I love when people are proud.
Yeah.
No, honestly, I think it is. I think it shows, one, a lot of commitment to work with a cause. You need to be really engaged with the cause of the organization, but above all, with the work that you are doing, right, as a person.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for sharing this. And I'm going to circle back to a few things that you said before. You mentioned it all started in the 80s, right? So
Mhm.
what moving to now, what are some of the most pressing environmental and conservation issues that the committee is currently focused on in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that, in the 80s we solved old growth logging, but it continues. We do have like we've achieved some really incredible protected areas and some big spaces to conserve at least a tiny portion of the old growth we have left. But that's definitely one of our main fights still is the fact that, some of the companies based out of Vancouver Island, it's literally written in their plans to liquidate all remaining old trees. Like they're going for all of it. So we're up against that until we kind of get a ban on old growth logging. That's always going to be one of our fights. So we have that ongoing. One of the areas I work a lot on is the protection of species at risk and creating stronger policies and laws that can sort of hold corporations to a higher standard when it comes to operating, let's say, in an endangered species habitat. For instance, I was in Blue River. It's a small town in BC, and I was in this beautiful like high alpine area next to this high alpine lake that feeds into one of the largest sockeye salmon runs in North America. And right at the top of this lake was a mining operation. And it was also overlapping caribou calving grounds. And in BC, caribou are endangered. So despite having such importance to one of the largest sockeye salmon runs and over top of endangered caribou calving grounds, there was an ongoing mining exploration happening, and they didn't need a permit to harm caribou in that way. Um, or to assess the impacts of the salmon. So it's like we just really lack laws that can even just measure the harm that projects are having. And so that's kind of what I advocate for, both in BC and federally. I work to hold the federal government accountable to the law they do have, which is the Federal Species at Risk Act. And it's kind of tiring when you have to repeatedly take your own government to court for failing to follow their own laws. But that's what a lot of my work has ended up being. And but we've been successful in that, and we've achieved some really amazing things through community, through organizing, and yeah. So those are two of the big campaigns we work on, and I guess one more that I'll mention is our glyphosate campaign. So yeah, glyphosate is a herbicide. It's used to kill. It's used in forestry. It's used around the world. It's used in forestry and it's used in like crop production, but we focus on its use in forestry because it's sprayed over top of forests from helicopters, and it kills all fungi, bacteria, and plants. So that's 3 of the 5 kingdoms of life. So when you have a corporation that's spraying this chemical over top of these massive swaths of habitat, killing off 3 of the 5 kingdoms of life, that has devastating impacts to the ecosystem and the people that live there too. So that's one of the campaigns I'm currently working on that's getting a lot of attention recently, and we're pushing for a ban in its use in forestry, and I think we're gonna win that campaign. So
Well, I hope you do, actually.
thank you. Got to stay optimistic, you know.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, absolutely. Honestly, and I think it's so frustrating actually to fight these battles so constantly. I think because even though we win, I believe, and I want to stay positive and think that in the end we're gonna win and see the impact. It's so hard to get companies and governments accountable for what is going on. I think maybe especially companies. In Brazil, we see a lot of those company-related disasters. This is how I'm going to call them, that have huge impacts in environment, and we don't see the companies like being held enough, let's say, because it's not just about the money, right? It's about the continuous use of toxic chemicals and all of that. So it's really, actually it shows why the work that you do, even though it's so hard, it's so important, because it's through that movement that we can actually have some effects, right? And thank you in this point. Thank you, honestly. This is why I do hope you get there, because it's a bigger victory than just to stop that. It's about giving us a sign, you know, giving us hope of things.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean it's also like we live, especially with the corporations, in such a like well, global corporate world where you have Canadian mining companies operating in places like Brazil, right? And so to pretend that Canada is like, that we have this like veneer that we're some sort of like standard that the world should hold ourselves to, but in fact, no, like we have some of the worst mining companies in the world in regards to like human rights standards, like ethics, and they operate freely, you know, in other places in the world. And so we have this responsibility to not only look at the impacts happening within you know this landscape here, but how our companies operate in the rest of the world. That's something we also need to be aware of. And accountability, like you said, is everything. You know, if a tailings pond collapses and the mine is fined, you know, $5,000 or like a slap on the wrist, like it's you have to have accountability measures that change behavior. If it's not changing behavior, it's not enough. That's another thing that we push for too.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. The one thing that I want to go back to your answers before, actually, is that you mentioned about protecting old forests, right? And I don't know, I might be speaking just for myself, but I think it took me some time to understand fully the importance of old forests. So could you help us understand that? Why do we need to mind this aspect?
Well, if we like think about what an old forest is, it's basically forest that has never been um like it's primary forest. It's never been disturbed by human activity or cut before. So a lot of these forests, like some are pushing 2,000 years old, these trees. Like they're relics of the past. They're ancient in and of themselves, and a lot of them established like post glaciation as glaciers retreated. We have these incredible forests, and to stand in the midst of one is pretty remarkable. The forest canopy is so spacey because trees sort of self-thin over time. So you get these massive, massive trunks, like a car width across, and then you'll have another tree maybe like 200 meters away. So it's like the forest you're standing in is unlike anything you've ever stood in before. Not only is it different in that sense, but also for the species that have co-evolved with these forests. Like we have animals here in BC that literally evolved with these old growth forests and rely on these old growth forests. Like we have a bird called the marbled murrelet, and they nest high up in old growth forest tree branches where thick layers of moss form. And these birds are so uncoordinated. They're built for life in the sea, not in the sky. So they're great divers. But when they come in the canopy, they're terrible flyers. So they kind of just like sort of bomb in and just like crash land. But because they land on these mossy branches, it's worked out for them. They've never, they're like, you know what? We don't need to further evolve this flying thing. We got these mossy branches. We're fine. So as you remove those big trees, you remove those big mossy branches, and all of a sudden they don't have the habitat they need to in order to survive. So it just like the stories of the old growth forests are so intertwined with wildlife and people as well. You see massive old trees that have cedar stripped from all the different First Nation communities on the coast here that built canoes in a way that still allowed the tree to live. And so like you walk through these forests and they tell a story and they tell a history, and globally they're globally rare. Like we have some of the largest trees on the planet here in BC. So um, it's really important that we protect these forests. And I think sometimes in BC, the people who live here, we can get a little like if it's in your backyard, you just think it's common, sort of like we don't understand how rare and how special they are. And so yeah, that's at the heart really of our work.
Mm. Thank you. Actually, I think this is the most precise explanation that I've ever heard about this
Oh,
topic. I talked to some people before about it, and I really like the way you put it because it shows us this environment, right? This almost this community and this balance there is,
mhm,
and it's very specific and very unique, and it works, and helps other things work too. So it's
mhm,
about the whole balance,
mhm.
and that thought actually gives me makes me do a leap to think about your involvement, like the Wilderness Committee involvement with communities, and maybe it
Mhm.
might be like to push a little bit, but maybe with First Nations as well, right?
Mhm.
In Canada. So how does that relationship work? Like, do you operate closely? Are you able to, involve their perspectives into the processes? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a topic that's ever evolving, and also like we have not been perfect in the past. There's probably things we're doing now that we'll look back on and be like, oh, that wasn't really the right way to do things. But we're really trying to well, we understand that you can't have conservation without justice. Like these lands were stolen. Every forest we step foot in to protect are home to a First Nation community who have survived on these lands and were pushed off of them. And so, um, in the context of just like morally doing what's just and what's right, it's obviously upholding sovereignty and supporting those First Nation communities in their efforts for sovereign decision making over their territories, but also from a perspective of what we actually need to survive. Indigenous managed lands harbor 80% of the world's biodiversity. So if we want to fix this biodiversity crisis, we need to be uplifting those Indigenous voices who have stewarded these lands long before we got here, and who have some of the secrets and some of the keys to how to live in a more harmonious and reciprocal way with each other and the land. Um, we work with many different First Nation communities. It's kind of what we do at the start of if we're starting a campaign. I usually like to just roll up and drive up, say hello, like I really feel this work has what I've learned is it really is all about relationships. It's about trust, and that means more than just, showing up when something you want they have, but it's actually like building relationships and trying to like support reaching visions together. So we do a lot of work with the Monongahela Nation on glyphosate spraying, and opposing over 500 cut blocks that were proposed to be sprayed on their territory. So we go out on the land with them, we take community members, and it's really amazing to also have like land revitalization and have communities back on the land that they've been displaced from for like hundreds of years. So we got to do that work. We do trail building as well with some of the North Island First Nations. And so that is kind of a really cheeky, strategic way to protect old growth. So basically, what we do is we go into forests that are at risk of logging. So we can see that a cut block has been approved or pending or proposed to be logged in an area. And we work with the First Nation guardians and we bring volunteers up and we build boardwalk throughout that area. And it's kind of a beautiful way to well, one, preserve the root systems of these old growth forests because you're kind of like lifting up the trail so that people are walking on top and not on the roots. But then also when you build trail, the public comes. So now you have the public using these areas, and a logging company is not going to go in and start cutting down, these old growth trees while there's like a family camping right there. So that trail building program has been super successful in halting the logging of I'd like the number on it. I'm sure we have it somewhere, but a large portion of cut blocks have not been logged because of that work. And then I'm also sort of starting another program that's focused on restoration with the Lower Smokebean Indian Band. So we're going out and we're restoring their territory that got severely burnt by wildfire. So we're stabilizing slope banks, replanting native species, and just sort of like kickstarting the succession of the ecosystem to support wildlife that desperately need that habitat right now. So we would say it's like it's at the crux of our work. Like it is intertwined. You can't talk about biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis without talking about justice for like Indigenous communities and supporting sovereignty and land back initiatives. So that's kind of where we approach that.
Yeah, I agree again. It's really, and it's amazing to see that it's really about working together, not just relying on someone to learn from and, do what you think is right. So it's really, really inspiring. Thank you for that. Charlotte, I really, really, really need to ask you this now because I would like to donate if I was Canadian. I would like to be part of the work that you guys are doing, but for everyone listening to us right now that might be able to help, what are the best ways to help you keep going?
Yeah, so I will say one of the reasons why I think we're the best is because we rely on individual people for donations. So if you contrast that with an organization that's grant-based, some of those grants are you can only use them in certain ways and you're kind of limited in your scope. We're different because we don't have any like it's not big grants we rely on, so we're able to work on any issue that we think is needed. And so it gives us a lot of flexibility to like tell the truth, to be proactive, to get out on the land and do things quickly. That's one of the main reasons why I love working here. And so, but with that, it means that, yeah, like our average donation, I believe, is $20 per person, and that per month. And that's how we're able to sustain our work. And it's a beautiful thing because it's a network of so many people. but yeah, we always need more monthly donors if you're interested. Like $5 a month goes such a long way. You get to kind of be involved in like the grassrootsy work we do, and you'll learn about like the field trips we can take you on. If you want to help start restoring land yourself, start trail building, you can come with us and do that work. So if you're interested in donating, you can go to wildernesscommittee.org/donate. And like I said, monthly donations is by far the best thing or the thing that we need the most. If you're not in a position to donate with your finances, just join us and donate a little bit of your time. We'll send out e-alerts and tools where you can help sort of pressure the government or corporations in ways that are effective and get some wins. So yeah, that's wildernesscommittee.org/sign up. So please check out our website and yeah, follow our social media too.
I'm going to make sure to include the link to your website on the description of this episode, so it's easy for people to find. That'd be awesome.
Great.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I love talking to you today.
Oh, this is so great. Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure, honestly. And for everybody listening or watching, remember, if you enjoyed this episode, press subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast app, because that shows the algorithms that this is an important conversation and more people can learn about the importance of the Wilderness Committee. Thank you for staying with us for this more episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.